talk today. Excited to be here today to talk with you all about an introduction to New York City's environmental local laws, Local Law 84, 87, and Local Law 88. As Tiara said, if you have questions as we go through this, please feel free to put them into the chat. We will be addressing them at the end of the presentation. And um, we will also be taking questions at the end. We'll let everybody unmute and be able to ask in person as well. So to start off, my name is Kristen Pecci. I am an associate principal and team leader at WB. I've been here for about 11 years. I am an electrical engineer by trade, but I now lead a multidisciplinary team of MEP engineers on both design and consulting projects. And I also have a concentration on management of kind of multi-site programs. I've led multi-site compliance-based programs focused on infrastructure upgrades in order to bring a client's portfolio into compliance with certain code requirements and local laws, including Local Law 191, which is focused on carbon monoxide detection, fire alarm upgrades, and most recently, a program focused on Local Law 88, which we'll be talking about today. With that, I'll toss it over to Ross.
Thanks, Kristen. My name is Ross Lynham. I'm an associate mechanical engineer here at WB. I've been with WB for almost 3 years now, but have overall about 8 years of experience in the industry and working with the codes and local laws, specifically Local Law 84, 87, that we'll be discussing today. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. So a little bit about WB, Engineers and Consultants. For those of you who don't know us, we are an MEP design and consulting firm. Founded in 1999, we just celebrated our 25th year. In that time, we started out as 2 locations in New York and Boston, and since then we have expanded to 12 offices across the country, and we boast 200 team members nationwide. Our team tackles everything from commercial interior tenant fit-outs to large-scale mission-critical and data center infrastructure, science and technology spaces like labs and testing facilities, as well as building optimization projects and strategic planning, focusing on reducing carbon footprint through efficient and coordinated building systems. In addition to that, we also have teams capable of reality capture, New York City special inspections, as well as full-scale building and system commissioning. Our commissioning team and field teams in particular are very involved with some of the projects focused on the local laws that we're going to be discussing today. So before we dive into the specifics of the particular local laws, we think it's important to recognize where these local laws stem from. So we'll be discussing the New York City Climate Mobilization Act. So New York City has undertaken one of the largest climate solutions by any city in the world, and it includes some of the most ambitious legislative action taken by a major city. This New York City Climate Mobilization Act, known as the CMA, was passed by the New York City Council in 2019, and the CMA focuses on reducing the city's carbon footprint and increasing energy efficiency of the city's largest buildings. It includes a series of approximately 13 local laws, which were enacted from 2009 all the way through 2022, including the 3 that we're going to be discussing today. And it targets achieving dramatic decarbonization goals through building assessments, benchmarking, reporting, infrastructure upgrades, establishment of financing programs and pilot programs, new building fossil fuel usage requirements, and most of all, overall accountability for reaching our carbon goals as a city. So the Climate Mobilization Act, the ultimate goal of the CMA is to reduce New York City's greenhouse gas emissions by 80% and looking to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So that does sound pretty aggressive and ambitious. However, you have to take into account the fact that approximately 71% of the greenhouse gas emissions within the city are from existing commercial and residential buildings. So once you realize that, you kind of see the strategy of focusing on building infrastructure and see, the value of identifying these local laws and legislative actions targeting existing and new buildings. So now that we kind of know the bigger picture, let's start to drill down to some of the details. So from the perspective of building systems and infrastructure, out of the CMA, some of the most crucial local laws are the ones that we kind of have identified on this slide. So Local Law 84 deals with energy use and reporting. Local Law 87 provides for energy audits and retrocommissioning of building systems. Local Law 88 calls for lighting and controls upgrades to meet New York City Energy Code requirements, as well as implementing requirements for tenant electrical submetering. The centerpiece of the CMA is Local Law 97, which we really will not be getting into today, but that implements annual reporting and calls for specific greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So, while this is a huge piece of legislation, because of the size of it and how detailed it is, we are working with the BOMA team to present a presentation in the near future dedicated to Local Law 97 specifically. And so we'll be talking about that, and there'll be more info to come to the BOMA team. So now that we've kind of set the stage, Ross is going to take us through the specifics of the first on our list, Local Law 84.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. As we jump into Local Law 84, just a quick overview of some facts. It was introduced in 2009, and it sets the standard for benchmarking building energy and water usage. The local law received a couple of revisions in 2016, 2018, and 2019 to further expand on the original law. This local law currently applies to buildings that exceed 25,000 square foot, or in areas that have two or more buildings that share a single tax lot that exceed a total of 100,000 square feet. Those also fall under Local Law 84 too. Local Law 84 requires the building owner to benchmark their energy usage annually and submit the benchmarking report no later than May 1st of each year. Tenants within the buildings that have separate meters are required to report their information by February 15th to the owner to include in that report. If a tenant were to terminate their lease prior to reporting, the tenant is required to report the energy and water usage data to the owner prior to them vacating the space. Owners should retain their utility data information and keep it on hand, because when data is missing, the owners should document their efforts to obtain that data. Because if you need to reach out and get an extension on the date, it's important to keep record of those efforts so you can get that extension. The energy benchmarking data is also submitted through the Energy Star Portfolio Manage portal, which I'll talk about now. It's an online tool. If you jump to the next page, sorry, thank you. The Energy Star Portfolio Manager is an online portal for tracking building metrics, which include the energy usage of the building space use, any certifications or Energy Star scores from previous years that the building has, as well as other general building information. The Energy Star Portfolio Manager is managed by the EPA and allows for the comparison of building energy performance against their peers. And that just means other buildings of similar types and use cases. The Energy Star Portfolio Manager is the industry standard for energy rating of buildings, and an account should be created by the owners if one's not already set up for the buildings you guys are associated with. And you can also importantly share view-only access to your portfolio manager for a property or multiple properties to third-party groups. And this can be really helpful for engineers when we're trying to confirm the benchmarking data is correct. Taking a look at the data inputs that kind of go into the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, you're required for benchmarking to put in the same baseline information for all different property types, which includes the property name, the address, the gross floor area of the building, the irrigated area, which is the outdoor area with vegetation that is provided water regularly with sprinklers or otherwise. You also need to provide the year that the building was built, the occupancy type of the building, the number of buildings that are on the property, and most importantly, the 12 months of energy data needs to be uploaded to Portfolio Manager. This is the minimum amount of information that needs to be provided when doing the benchmarking report. Depending on the different building types and uses, there might be some additional pieces of information that are required for the report. The energy usage data is collected from the utility bills for the building and needs to be tracked for electricity, natural gas, steam, and fuel oil usage. The information submitted on the Energy Star Portfolio Manager portal under the Energy tab, you'll create a meter for each one of the meters you have listed on the utility bills on the Energy Star Portfolio Manager portal. Owners can upload the energy usage monthly when the bills are received, so they can track all that information each month. And then after the 12-month periods complete, the utility information can be collected and the benchmarking report can be completed. The report must be certified by a registered design professional. The certification requires back checking all of the energy building data that's uploaded to the Energy Star Portfolio Manager against the original utility bills to make sure it's all accurate. That information on Energy Star Portfolio Manager can be exported to Excel, which is really useful for the people who are reviewing it and back checking against the utility data. Once the certified report is complete and given back to the owner, it can be submitted through Energy Star Portfolio Manager, like the portal as well. The report requires a signature and seal from the certified design professional who did the review. The reports need to be submitted by May 1st of each year to avoid penalties. The first penalty is a $500 fee for missing the May 1st deadline. And then for each quarter of the year after that the report is not submitted, you get charged an additional $500. But the maximum you can be fined up in a year due to this penalty is $2,000. Now, before we jump into the next local law, 87, I wanted to give a quick overview of energy audits and retro commissioning because these are the two integral parts of local law 87. Starting out with what an energy audit is, it's an assessment of the current energy usage and performance of a building to then make recommendations for improvements for that building. The audit will typically include detailed analysis of the energy and water usage, which is collected from the utility bills. The analysis can identify energy uses that deviate from normal and can indicate issues with the building and potential opportunities for improvement. It essentially works as kind of like a health check for the building. The utility data is used to establish the baseline or benchmark for carbon emissions from a building. Carbon or greenhouse gas emissions are commonly measured in tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. That's commonly shown as TCO2e. It's based on the global warming potential of multiple different greenhouse gases quantified into a single number. It's essentially a weighted average of the impacts of a bunch of different greenhouse gases based on like the amount that are produced from different energy uses. Audits have different levels, which are defined by ASHRAE. That's an international organization for professionals and experts in the HVAC industry or related fields. A level 1 audit is commonly referred to as a walkthrough or a scoping audit, and it's essentially just that. It's a high-level view of a building and will produce energy measures that are most likely no or low cost to the owner. The estimated savings from a level 1 audit will be presented in rough order of magnitude estimates because you're not getting into the real detail level to get really fine-tuned cost values. These kind of audits are really useful for smaller buildings or buildings with minimal complexity, where savings potentials might already be lower. The next level is a level 2 audit, and it's a more comprehensive and detailed survey with measurements in the field. This kind of survey takes a close look at all the systems in a building, and it will result in equipment inventories, detailed energy efficiency measures with a schedule for implementing those measures, as well as some financial analysis outlining the capital costs of implementing the measures, and as well as payback timelines for those new energy efficiency measures once they're put in place. Level 2 audits are really useful for larger buildings and buildings with more complex systems. There's also a level 3 audit, which just kind of takes a level 2 audit to the next level, but that's kind of beyond the scope of what's required for the local law. Jumping into kind of the energy audit process for both a level 1 and a level 2 audit, this process is essentially the same. It's just the granularity of detail will vary slightly. You'll start out with benchmarking and establishing the baseline of the emissions for a building through you reviewing the utility bills. And then you'll want to gather some existing documentation from the building owner. That could be architectural, mechanical, electric, and plumbing drawings, sequence of controls for the equipment of a building. You want to get all of that kind of gathered together, review it, and get prepared to do a site survey for a building. Well, you'll be on site walking through, taking a look at all the systems and keeping notes. And once you complete the survey, you'll then do an energy use analysis. So you'll take that information you have from the utility plans and the information gathered on site, and you'll discern where the energy is being used. If they have a chiller plant that's using a lot of energy, if they're using a lot of energy for lighting and their lighting controls, and it'll just kind of assess where all the energy that's shown on the utility bills is being used in the building. Once that's done, you'll take a look at all of that information and you'll establish areas where you can improve the building's performance by establishing energy efficiency measures, which are also sometimes called ECMs, which are energy conservation measures. Once you get your list of energy efficiency measures, you'll assign costs for constructing those and implementing those into a building and compare them against the payback for the energy savings to get a timeline for which they'll pay for themselves and include that as a part of a cost benefit analysis. And then the final step is essentially taking steps 1 through 5 and bundling that all together into one detailed energy audit report. These savings outlined in these energy audit reports will impact compliance with the citywide emissions goals established in Local Law 97. But like we discussed earlier on, we're not going to get into great detail in Local Law 97 in this presentation, but we'll have a dedicated presentation for this topic in the future. Now, starting out with what is retro commissioning, it's essentially the process of fine-tuning building systems to ensure that they're running at their optimal performance. And can help identify things in a building that need to be fixed. Retro commissioning involves having an engineer or a team of engineers on site reviewing the existing building documentation and doing some investigation of the building systems to identify these faults. These kind of issues could include broken occupancy sensors, leaking pipes, missing insulation, or anything else that just deviates from a normal, fully functioning building. Retro commissioning is relatively low cost to implement, and due to the nature of a lot of the small fixes that they'll find and that can be made, they can have really big impacts on energy reduction. The benefits of retro commissioning really are just reducing the emissions. And from our experience, we can see that introducing retro commissioning to a building can help reduce these emissions by 10 to 15% within the first year. And they also typically see a return on investment within the first year as well, which is really great. It also helps extend the life of building systems and makes them more resilient. And having a more reliable system has the added financial benefit of minimizing downtime or outages when you need to make repairs, and not having to replace equipment as often because you're more in tune with the state of the equipment and you can help extend its life. Having taken a quick overview of the energy audits and the retro commissioning, we're now going to jump into Local Law 87. This was also introduced in 2009, and it establishes the requirements for energy audits and retro commissioning to be completed by owners every 10 years. The year in which retro commissioning is and the energy audits are required is determined by the last digit of the tax block number for the property. So if that tax block number ends in a 6, that means you need to be completing your energy audit and retro commissioning reports in the years 2026, and then again in 2036, and so on and so forth every 10 years. You have a 4-year window ahead of your filing deadline year to submit that report and complete all the work for it. So that essentially gives you some flexibility because different buildings vary in size and complexity. So you typically want to get this started earlier on so you have enough time to get the engineering teams involved and on site to go through the whole building, review the documentation, and put these reports together. Typically, on average, for most of the buildings, we would recommend that you start at least 1 year before the start of your filing deadline. And that will give you kind of enough time to get a team on site and put the report together. There are some exceptions to what buildings are required to submit an energy audit. The exceptions must be reviewed and certified by a registered design professional. The exceptions are mostly related to alternate avenues of proving that the energy performance of your building greatly exceeds the average of that building type. So you're pretty much proving that your building is outperforming anyone else of your same building type by quite a bit. There's like some LEED certification stuff associated with that too. And also, there's an exception for what's called a simple building. And a simple building is defined as a building that doesn't have a central chilled water system or central cooling system that serves more than 10% of the building. The exception for a simple building works a little differently. It essentially has a list of 7 requirements that a simple building needs to meet. And you have to meet 6 of those 7 requirements to apply for the exception to performing the energy audit and retro commissioning. I'm not going to go into any more detail on those exceptions or requirements, but if we have more time and people have specific questions about those, we can circle back at the end. Um, the retro commissioning required by Local Law 87 should be completed prior to the filing of the energy efficiency report. The term energy efficiency report is just the combined report from the energy audit and the retro commissioning together. And it should summarize all the impacts from both the audit and retro commissioning in one cohesive document. This report needs to be filed by the owner during the filing year between January 1st and December 31st. You can file for extensions as the owner if you can prove that you've made good faith efforts to complete the report in the timeline. And there's also extensions available if owners in the building are going through financial hardships as well. Once the report's complete, the Building Energy Score website is the place where this will be uploaded. It's run by the New York City Department of Buildings. You should set up an account at this website. And also on this website, they have specific requirements for the formatting and how the report should be submitted, but they have pretty good quick start guides and templates that can really assist with making sure the documentation is in line. Even though this Local Law 87 is requiring energy audits and retro commissioning every 10 years, it's typically recommended in our industry to do it every couple of years because you'll see more benefits out of it. And also with building management systems, if you have a state-of-the-art newer system in the building, a lot of them are capable of fault detection and diagnostic tools, which can be implemented. They essentially apply algorithms to detect and diagnose issues from the measured data that the BMS is taking in. And it can provide alerts in real time for actions to take to retro commission your building in real time, which is pretty cool. Quickly overviewing the systems reviewed as a part of the energy audits and the retro commissioning include the building envelope, the conveying systems, which include an elevator or escalator type system in a building, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning or HVAC, also the domestic water serving a building, as well as the electrical and lighting systems. A lot of these have potential for energy savings. So with the building envelope, you'll be kind of looking at savings with like windows upgrades and window treatments or upgrading insulation in your walls and things like that. The HVAC can be very energy intensive. It sometimes is the most energy intensive for most buildings. So making small improvements to the HVAC system can have huge impacts on your energy savings. Similarly with domestic water, specifically with like heating of domestic water, you can upgrade those systems and save a lot of money there. And electrical and lighting systems and upgrading to more modern systems or controls can have huge benefits to savings too. That's it for my overview of Local Law 84 and 87. So I'm going to turn things back over to Kristen to jump into the next one.
Thanks, Ross. So shifting gears into Local Law 88, I think it's helpful to first talk a little bit about energy codes in general, since much of this local law ties directly into those requirements. So most energy codes are built from or reference one or both of the recognized standards, which are the International Energy Conservation Code, or IECC, or the ASHRAE 90.1 2010 standard. So typically, jurisdictions will either adopt all of one of those standards or part of it, such as the IECC, and build upon it by enacting their own code that either modifies, removes sections, or replaces specific sections with new verbiage. So New York State implemented its first energy code more than 45 years ago in 1979. And in 2002, they updated their energy code to align with the IECC. So the Energy Conservation Construction Code of New York State was kind of the sole law of the land until about 2010, when New York City enacted the first New York City Energy Conservation Code, or NYECC. So this date of 2010 is important because it factors into the applicable requirements of Local Law 88, and we'll discuss those shortly. So the NYC is based on the state code, which in turn is based on the IECC. And it governs energy efficiency requirements for building within New York City only, so the 5 boroughs. In addition to kind of the standard path under the NYCECC based on IECC, there's also an addendum that identifies the New York City specific requirements associated with the ASHRAE 90.1 2010 standard. So a building or project can choose to utilize that ASHRAE path as kind of an alternate compliance path, although it's often more stringent and restrictive. Typically, a project will choose to follow that path for a specific purpose, like perhaps they're pursuing LEED, which ASHRAE 90.1 would be the standard for LEED requirements. Sometimes a specific system, or the HVAC system usually, may have specific parts of it that would be more advantageous to apply under ASHRAE. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that a project would be required to follow the same standard across all trades. So you want to make sure that just because something is more advantageous for one trade, such as mechanical, you're not locking yourself into something more restrictive and ultimately unachievable in another trade like electrical, lighting, plumbing, etc. So the NYCECC, like we said before, builds on the New York State Code and IECC, and it implies more stringent local laws that help align with New York City's ambitious carbon reduction goals. So the latest version of the NYCECC is 2020. Sorry, that's what we're in right now, the 2020 NYCECC code. And that includes requirements for things like more efficient lighting, building envelope, mechanical systems and controls, plumbing, heating equipment, system commissioning, and things like that. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about the energy codes, let's jump back into Local Law 88, talk a little bit more about the specifics here. This particular local law was adopted back in 2009, kind of just before New York City's first energy code was ratified. And it is applicable to buildings greater than 50,000 square feet, or 2 or more buildings on the same tax lot that together exceeds 100,000 square feet. So the initial deadline for compliance and reporting for Local 88 was originally January 1st, 2025. However, mid last year, the DOB amended the reporting deadline only to May 1st, 2025. So compliance was still required by January 1st of this year, technically, but the reports are not due until that May deadline. And this is for a very specific reason. The city has opted to employ a new data entry and reporting system based on a platform called BEAM, Building Energy Analysis Manager, BEAM. And this is an existing platform that has had success for similar programs in other jurisdictions. So rather than kind of reinventing the wheel through the DOB, New York City chose to partner with NEEP, Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships, to use this BEAM platform to track the needed data, and it also helped aggregate the data for building owners. But in typical DOB fashion, because it's kind of a new thing, the city is still kind of working out the kinks, and the portal is unfortunately not up and running yet. So we anticipate it to be up and running shortly. And we've been checking with the DOB frequently towards that end, but there's nothing nothing released yet as to the date of that portal opening. So once that BEAM portal is opened, reports will be able to be uploaded directly through that platform. There will be a filing fee of $115 per building, and this fee is going to cover both parts of Local Law 88 reporting requirements, which we'll get into. So, as we mentioned earlier, Local Law 88 has two areas of compliance associated with it: lighting fixture and control upgrades and tenant electrical submetering requirements. So we'll focus first on the lighting aspects of Local Law 88. So the basis of the lighting portion of this local law is that lighting systems must comply with New York City Energy Conservation Code. So going back to that 2010 date, projects filed in New York City on or after July 1st of 2010 were required to comply with New York City Energy Conservation Code. And they had to prove compliance by submitting energy compliance drawing packages or reports as part of the filing of those projects. So when Local Law 88 was enacted in 2009, they were already aware of this upcoming NYC ECC and some of the initial requirements associated. So because of that, Local Law 88 states that any project filed on or after that July 1st, 2010 date does not require additional upgrade under Local Law 88 because it would all have already been in compliance based on the applicable version of the NYC ECC and the filing requirements therein. So Local Law 88 is really targeting the vast majority of spaces and buildings that were installed prior to that 2010 threshold. And therefore, those installations would not have been subject to any specific energy code requirements. So the goal is really to bring that aging existing infrastructure up to code and help kind of reduce energy usage based on that. So what's interesting is that the local law kind of knew that the future versions of the NYCC ECC were likely to continue to get more stringent, which is really what we see with most codes. Every time they have a code update or a new version of a code, we see new and more restrictive measures. The Local 88 stated that, in order to be compliant, you'd have to be compliant with the version of the New York City Energy Conservation Code that was applicable at the time of your project. So if a space had not been upgraded prior to that 2010 threshold, it would make sense for an owner to upgrade as soon as possible thereafter that threshold, because the longer they waited, the more stringent the energy code would become. So a lot of owners between 2010, 2015, et cetera, started to take advantage of Local 88 and file their projects therein. Anyone who's waited kind of after that was going to be beholden to the 2020 New York City Energy Conservation Code, which is again more restrictive. In addition, there are some exemptions to Local Law 88, specifically dwelling units in R2 and R3 occupancies, as well as the spaces serving those dwelling units, like boiler rooms, corridors, etc., are exempt, as well as spaces classified as occupancy group A3 within a house of worship. Those spaces are also exempt from Local Law 88 requirements. So what is actually required under this local law and the energy code? So there's two parts of the lighting side. One is the lighting power density allowances, which are calculated in watts, that are prescribed under the energy code. So this is basically watts per square foot allowed based on either the building area method or the space by space method. So the building area method prescribes a certain lighting power density, watts per square foot, based on the building overall use type. So an office use type would have a lighting power density allowance of 0.79 watts per square foot, while something like a museum would have a higher lighting power density of 1.06 watts per square foot. So depending on the type of building, that would dictate what the overall allowance is, and then you'd have to do a simple calculation based on the square footage of your building for the overall allowance. You would then total up the existing lighting or the proposed lighting fixture wattage overall and compare that, what's in use versus what's allowable to see if you were either over or under that threshold. The space by space method is similar, but instead of taking the building as a whole, it assigns a lighting power density to individual spaces within a building. and it allows you to trade between those spaces. So if your conference room, let's say, is over the allowance for that particular space type, but a private off or a series of private offices within the building are under their allowed wattages, you might be able to even out or balance across and still be in compliance. So the space by space method is a little bit more of a tedious calculation because you do have to break it down much more granularly across every single space in the building. But it is typically used for projects that don't encompass the entire building, or when you want to take advantage of the ability to trade allowances between spaces. So the goal of the lighting power density requirement is really to force the use of energy efficient lighting fixtures like LEDs, and get away from some of the more energy heavy lighting. So when you take at face value, kind of the difference in wattage between a single compact fluorescent fixture and a single LED fixture, it may not seem all that significant. Compact fluorescents, have become much more energy efficient, through the years. However, when you look at, when you figure this across multiple floor plates, within a high-rise building, and you also factor in the amount of time that lighting is in use, it can be of significant savings, especially when you take it over the year, and the annual reduction is definitely worth looking into. Something else to keep in mind is that owners can either choose to replace fixtures in total with LED fixtures, so like a one-to-one replacement strategy, which may be a little bit more costly upfront. Or they can do something like an LED retrofit, like a LED bulb replacement, or utilize LED retrofit kits for existing fixtures where you wouldn't have to replace the entirety of the fixture. Retrofits do often offer slight reductions in upfront costs. However, there is something to keep in mind that you want to make sure you are aware of any control requirements, because sometimes these retrofit kits aren't compatible with dimmable controls. You want to make sure you're confirming driver compatibility. And sometimes they're not capable of that dimming, or they're not easily compatible with certain controls, which could be costly to update, or ultimately may force your hand to replace down the line when you're trying to look at the controls requirements. So something to just keep in mind there for building owners and operators. The second part of the lighting upgrade requirements does factor into the control side, and this would include installation of automatic controls like occupancy or vacancy sensors, dimmable controls, daylight harvesting, time-based controls, all of which are prescribed depending on the space type. So something like an open office area would require automatic controls, occupancy sensors, which would be automatic on, automatic off control. There are dimming requirements as well. Lighting fixtures located next to windows or under skylights have certain photocell requirements for daylight harvesting, etc. So depending on the space type or the architecture of the space, there's different controls requirements. And both sides of this, the lighting power densities and the control requirements, are applicable to both interior and exterior lighting. So when talking about the lighting fixture and controls upgrade side of Local Law 88, the reporting side of this, the submission deadline, like we said before, is May 1st of 2025. Reports are going to be required to be filed per building. So certifying that the entire building has been inspected and upgrades have been implemented to comply with the applicable New York City Energy Conservation Code. So this report itself must come from either a professional engineer, a licensed electrician, or a licensed special electrician. So it has to be from one of those three types of professionals. Can't just be certified by a building owner or a building manager. And since the report is per building, the requirement does fall back on the building owner or manager for multi-tenant buildings. So ownership will have to make a decision to choose either to perform that work themselves, or they could potentially dictate that tenants will have to perform and verify this work, or prove compliance of their space and report it back to the building so it can be compiled within the overall building's report. There is a penalty for not filing a lighting compliance report. That is $1,500, which will be assessed annually until that report is filed. There is a rumor of potential future penalties. Certain things like not allowing the filing of future work or something similar for gross noncompliance, but there's nothing official stated that yet, just something to keep in mind as we move forward. So the next section of Local Law 88 that applies is the section is on tenant electrical submetering. So this dictates the installation of electrical submeters within tenant spaces either over 10,000 square feet on one or more floors of a building, let or sublet by the same person, or a floor of a building larger than 10,000 square feet, which is let or sublet by two or more different people. Again, similar to what we saw on the lighting fixture side, dwelling units in occupancy groups R2 and R3 are again exempt. So, residential spaces, aren't as applicable here to Local 88. So each tenant space is required to be monitored by a submeter, which is installed by the owner. And again, that deadline was January 1st, 2025. Or thereafter, so as a new covered tenant space might be created within a building, it would be required at that time to install a new submeter to monitor that space. And so we have talked specifically about submeters. There are different types of electrical meters. Here you can kind of see the two different types. On the left is what we refer to as just a meter. It's installed by a utility company, and it's usually used by that utility company to bill consumers for incoming electrical service. These utility meters typically have a CT or a current transformer cabinet, which you can kind of see in this photo on below the meter. And it's usually locked by the utility. The only one who has access to either the CT or the meter itself is the utility company. On the right-hand side, we have an example of one type of submeter. This is something that's installed by others. It could be installed by the building owner, a landlord, a tenant, etc. And this is used mostly for reporting. It can also be used for apportioning electrical costs among tenants, but it is not used by the utility. So each tenancy that is 10,000 square feet or less shall have a separate submeter. It may also share a submeter with other tenant spaces on the floor, or it could share the submeter across the entire floor. So it is important to note, though, that while tenant spaces are allowed to share submeters across a single floor, that does often complicate some of the reporting. And an owner may choose to provide separate submeters per tenant to avoid complicated calculations to determine usage. You would have to break it down to, if you have a meter for a full floor, tenant A may have, 23% of the floor, where tenant B has 57% of the floor, and et cetera. And you'd have to break down the overall usage per month per space based on their floor area. So that can, for multi-tenant floors specifically, get very complicated. So sometimes owners choose to just take on the onus of installing separate submeters and work with the submetering vendor to apportion that properly. Additionally, spaces that have a dedicated incoming service and therefore have a specific dedicated utility meter directly from the utility are not required to be submetered, since that space is not apportioned electrical usage through the building. So it would kind of be like double dipping in that regard. Addition, to requiring the installation of the meter, Local Law 88 also requires that monthly statements be provided to each tenant or subtenant to report the electrical usage as captured by that meter. So similar to the lighting side, submetering compliance reports will also be submitted through the Beam platform, and the deadline for those will also be May 1st of 2025. The report, again, for this will be filed per building. It is separate, obviously, from the lighting side, but it is covered under that same $115 filing fee. And the report will have to certify that the submeters are installed. It'll also have to include a list of all covered tenant spaces in the building. and as well as sample monthly statements for each tenant or submeter will have to be uploaded to the Beam platform as part of this submission. Similar to the lighting side, this report will also need to be prepared by a professional engineer, a licensed electrician, or a licensed special electrician. So something to keep in mind there. Again, penalties are applicable for non-compliance. On the submetering side, it is again another $1,500 penalty for failing to file the report, which would be assessed annually until the compliance report is filed. Additionally, there's also a $500 penalty for failing to install a submeter, and that $500 penalty would be assessed annually per covered tenant that is missing a meter until that submeter is installed. So that penalty could add up depending on the number of submetered spaces that are not in compliance within a building, especially for a larger building with lots of submetering requirements. So now that we've kind of discussed the finer points of these three local laws, we did just want to talk a little bit about how our company WB could assist in this in these endeavors. So kind of as we discussed at the beginning of the presentation, WB is more than just an MEP design firm. While we can be the engineer of record for design and construction projects and provide obviously the reports like we've discussed earlier in this presentation for Local Law 88 and some of the others, there are other things that we can assist owners and operators. We do a fair amount of strategic planning on systems and specific building energy goals. We can work alongside building owners, operators, and managers to get to know the building systems and help craft a very site-specific approach, one that's tailored specifically to the needs of that space and those systems, including things like overall system assessment, equipment upgrades and replacement recommendations, budgeting, rough order of magnitude cost estimates, including potential return on investment calculations. We also can work through project and program planning and execution, both for individual buildings or across multiple buildings within your portfolio. So all of these are examples of things that we are doing right now with a host of our existing clients. And if anyone has any questions about this, we'd be happy to talk in further detail about that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ross to talk a little bit about the audit life cycle.
Yeah, specifically as it relates to the Local Law 87, we can help with every stage in the audit lifecycle, from performance benchmarking to reporting and local law energy policy compliance reports and investigations. We can assist with ESG consulting and green building certifications. We do all levels of energy audits, level 1 through 3. We can also help with the master planning of the energy efficiency measures and retro commissioning measures that come out of an energy audit. And that just helps establish when to implement those and the cost benefit analysis and putting together a schedule for a building to introduce these measures into it. And also related to the EEMs, we can also work with the local governments and kind of do some research and put together a list of incentives and rebates that are available for the EEMs that we're suggesting as well for an owner.
So with that, that is, we do have some upcoming milestone dates that we wanted to make you aware of. 2030, we have that deadline for 40% emissions reduction, as well as 2050 is that net zero carbon neutrality goal for New York. And with that, we wanted to open it up to the team. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you feel free to unmute yourself, ask us directly. You do have our contact information here, so feel free to reach out to either Ross or I. We'd be happy to talk more about anything specific.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
What's the difference between local law 134 and 88? Is 134 the updated law for 88?
Local law 134, I believe, is the rules associated with 88. I'm not quite sure. I know the rules for New York City were updated around, I want to say, September of last year. Yeah, that's the Yes, that's one of the regulations governing the commitment to the energy efficiency. So it is related, but it has some additional requirements that are not part of local law 88.
Understood. Okay. Thank you.
And I don't know that it has the same reporting requirements that local law 88 has. I believe local law 88 is much more robust in that. Any other questions that we can answer for you? No? Okay, well, like I said, if anyone, has any questions or would like to discuss anything particular of any of the buildings that you are associated with, feel free to reach out to either myself or Ross. We want to thank you guys for your time. We hope that, we've able to give you a little bit more information to understanding some of New York City's climate goals. They are quite ambitious. Leaders in the nation in terms of some of the carbon reduction emissions goals. So, this is, you can see how we can work together to help achieve some of these carbon, the reduction of our carbon footprint. So, like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out.